Alright, listen up, Squirt. I've got a number of monster hunting tips to take your monster hunting game to the next level.
Hello everyone. With Monster Hunter Wilds right around the bend, I thought it a pretty good idea to make a video talking completely about new player oversights and things that basically new players tend to struggle with. Sometimes, some people get it, some people get more confused than others, and that's perfectly fine. This video should be able to cover most of those. At least from my perspective. If I leave anything out or I miss anything, be sure to let me know. The first thing I want to talk about, though, is crafting. So, when you enter the pause menu, or you go to your stash, you're going to find a crafting list. The crafting list is beneficial for a number of reasons, and to most hunters and most people who've already played Monster Hunter, they probably already know kind of the basics around it. Even if you've played Monster Hunter for a little bit, you might have taken a look at it. The game by default auto-crafts things like mega potions and other stuff, but there's a couple of really important details that are not inherently obvious. Not right away, at least. One of these is the Radial menu. The fact that you can basically craft things immediately on the fly during the hunt is going to take your hunting level up to a much higher degree in numerous different ways. I like to look at the crafting in this game as kind of a pseudo difficulty slider. Another thing you could lump under that is trapping monsters and capturing them, which I like to categorize kind of under the same umbrella. When you're crafting, you can basically craft 90% of the useful equipment during the hunt. Assuming you have the necessary items and ingredients, you can do that. If you're ever having too much of a struggle during a hunt, taking advantage of your crafting menu is going to very much help you. Whether you need more flash bombs, you need more mega potions, which this is kind of where I think most hunters will benefit. If you take some honey with you, if you take honey and you take a bunch of regular potions, you basically never have to use a regular potion again, which is kind of a big deal. It's kind of a game changer. It basically makes it so you always have 20 megapots rather than regular potions. Because typically what you bring is you bring 10 regular potions and you bring 10 mega potions. In this particular instance, if you bring 10 honey with 10 regular potions, you trade an inventory slot, but if you set it up on your Radial menu to craft mega potions, you can craft those instantly during the hunt, and in Wilds, the way the Radial menu works is quite good, actually. Quite a step up from the other games. And you can instantly craft 10 by just pressing the button once. That's going to make it so you basically go from having 10 mega potions to 20 during a hunt. It saves you from having to run back to your camp and, restock. And in emergency situations, it's definitely going to be useful. The other thing is you can also craft max potions, which when you start doing that and you bring ingredients for max potions, you bring your mandragoras and I forget the other thing. I think it's a god bug. And you bring the items to craft max potions, you just have a one-stop button to press just to max out your HP bar. This is basically a speedrunner tactic. A lot of speedrunners do it. It's very expensive and takes a lot of time to farm up, but it pays off in the end because it just saves you so much time from healing. This is something you can do. Outside of that, there's other uses for crafting. Outside of just healing, right? You can craft tons of other useful items like, traps, status effect things like sleep knives, poison knives, or... Another thing you can do is when you get to high rank, and I don't know if this is going to be a thing, I hope they keep it because in my opinion it's always fun, but usually once you get to high rank in a Monster Hunter game, there are things called the Armor Charm and Power Charm, which you can purchase from a vendor, typically it's your general goods vendor, once you get to high rank. In the crafting menu, if you combine a Power Charm and an Armor Charm, you will get a Talon variant. And basically, the Power Charm, the Armor Charm, will sit in your inventory, at least in the older games, this is how it worked. Who knows, they could change this with Wilds, but it would sit in your inventory and it would give you a universal armor and attack boost, basically. And this is, one useful aspect about crafting because it's very important because it ends up being a sizable damage increase. At least for the Power Talon and the Power Charm when you have them both in your inventory. That is going to, like I said, it's a pseudo difficulty slider where I guess you could take it off and run the game on a harder difficulty, or you can have them both on, or you can only have one set of the Power and Armor Charm on. It really is your own decision with that. And then there's, other things, right? You don't have to use all of the tools available to you in Monster Hunter, but you absolutely can. That's one of my favorite things about the game, is that you can just use so many different tools and prepare. So preparation, that's going to make hunts easier. It's going to make them less challenging. And if you're a person who is rather intimidated by a monster like Arkveld from the demo, this is going to be one thing that's going to benefit you a lot. Because Arkveld is a monster you can trap, and this kind of gets into my second point. Capturing monsters and trapping them is undoubtedly going to make the game easier. Now, I'm not really going to cover whether capturing monsters is more efficient or whatever. Typically in Monster Hunter games, you do get different materials for capturing versus killing a monster. And that is important to know because when you're doing that, it could increase the amount of times you have to hunt a monster if you're not careful. It's kind of important to know what item you want because then you can just see what gives you the highest drop rate in your hunter's notes, which I'll talk about later. But then, on top of that, other ways to increase your damage as well as also decrease the difficulty of hunts. Or increase if you don't want to do any of these. It's really up to you, like I said. But, there are tons of environmental hazards that you can keep an eye out for, take advantage of. The new luring pods. These are brand new. These luring pods basically work like reverse dung pods, where it just makes it so the monster follows you and hones in on you specifically. I love these things. These things are great. If you ever play a sort of weapon that relies heavily on parries, or relies heavily on, drawing aggro from a monster, take Lance, for example, Charge Blade to some extent, even Hammer benefits from it quite a bit too. Having that additional aggro can really make hunting monsters easier. Believe it or not, the monster focusing on you can make it easier. It depends on player skill, of course. Outside of that, you don't have to be a god-tier gamer to use these either. Using a luring pod simply to lure a monster into a trap, an environmental hazard, another monster, just to get some additional damage in, is a perfectly viable strategy that will benefit the entire team. If you're hunting with multiple players and you can't get the aggro of the monster to come over to you, this thing will do it. And I'll tell you what, even in the demo, right? Even in the beta, when I was playing in the beta and I was helping random people with Arkveld, I killed him like multiple times with multiple random teams and a lot of my friends. When I was hunting Arkveld, I would use the luring pods many, many times to just get so much additional damage on Arkveld. You know, you drop a big spike on him and goes in for the beating session, right? So, you know, as a new player, you might be a little averse to like using traps because they're kind of expensive. You don't know how to make them. You don't know how easy they are to get, so you're kind of maybe hesitant to just use a bunch of items. I totally get it, right? Especially if you just never played one of these games before. But definitely don't be afraid to use them. You do get quite a bit, and farming for them is not that difficult, even from like the perspective of like, let's say the game doesn't really give you many. You can just farm them. Shock traps are typically pretty easy to get. It depends. Usually there's materials sold by the general goods vendor, which you can just buy. And that's how you get trap tools to be able to make them, so that's another thing to keep in mind. But yeah, feel free to use them just to, like, if a monster is moving around a lot, they're moving around too much for you, you can't get a strike in, put a trap down, lure the monster into the trap, go to town. I tell you what, I think a lot of people underestimate the amount of damage you can get on a monster just from having those, like, couple seconds of the monster being, like, immobilized. It makes a huge difference in your overall damage. It really does, especially if you're not able to hit the monster. Moving on from traps and, you know, capturing monsters, right? Your weapon is, of course, the bread and butter of hunting, and you might not be fully familiar with your weapon. I can almost guarantee you're not, because there are a lot of, I almost want to say, hidden mechanics with weapons that are not described. Charge Blade has these sort of timed guard moments periodically throughout its moveset called guard points. And I don't want this video to be about Charge Blade, but basically it's a good example of something that's not really described in game. But, you know, there is something to consider. Your hunter's notes is going to be extremely beneficial to look at. One, your hunter's notes typically has a lot of useful information on all the monsters that you have discovered or hunted in the past. So you can get drop rate information for like parts and things from your hunter's notes. So check back frequently. I assume it would be the same in Wilds. It's a good system, so I don't think they would change it unless they add something new in. Once again, I did not get a review copy of this game, so I really have no idea. But another thing about it is it has the weapon controls. And if you go into your hunter's notes, you actually get a pretty relatively detailed explanation. Not that detailed, but you do get like some of your combos and some of the things you can do. And you can figure that stuff out at the lovely training area, which is another lovely improvement to the game. The training area has a lot of customizable aspects to it. I'm still deciding whether or not I think it's better than the Monster Hunter Rise training dummy, but it does give you all of the essentials you need. The training dummy in Monster Hunter Wilds, I spent a lot of time sort of messing around with it, and it has a lot of cool features. To explain the training dummy is you have a number of these different options you can select. One, you can select hard or soft parts. You can change the orientation of the training dummy. You can change the mode, the attacking mode, or whether it's just standing there taking a beating for fun. And you can change the wounding mechanics on it. So when you wound a monster, basically you can test out either your like special wounding attacks there, and you can test out the wounding system pretty much, kind of get an understanding for that. Another thing, the dummy allows you to change hit zone values. The soft and hard parts, when it's soft, I believe the hit zone value is somewhere around 100%. I would hope so. I cannot confirm this is purely speculative, but I assume it's somewhere around that range for the theory crafters. And I think the hard one is set for maybe around 30%. It's hard to say. But the dummy is going to allow you to train, it's going to allow you to practice your moves, it's going to allow you to learn your moveset and become familiar with your weapon. The smash pattern is pretty cool. Basically, the smash pattern allows you to change how hard you get hit when the training dummy hits you. So whether, you get flat out knocked down, you get knocked back, or you just get, you just get a little tap upside your noggin, right? It allows you to adjust that setting, which is cool. That's not something we typically have gotten before. Next up is your skills. So skills are pretty interesting. So they basically function the same if you've played Monster Hunter World or you've played Rise. You know how it works for the most part. But if you're new, you might not know this, but in Monster Hunter, you have kind of two classes of hunter. You have gunners and you have blade masters. Gunners and blade masters, basically gunners are the three ranged weapons: bow, bowgun, heavy bowgun. These three weapons are classified as gunner weapons. Blade masters is everything else, pretty much, including gunlance. So, one thing I've noticed about Monster Hunter Wilds and the armor in Monster Hunter Wilds is it seems that, and it doesn't seem to be explained. I don't remember it being explained in the beta. This, of course, could be changed in the main game. Hopefully it is. But basically, there is a speed sharpening skill, right, that you can have on one of the armor sets. And one of the armor sets basically gives you speed sharpening. And what they don't tell you is that it changes into ballistics, the ballistic skill, when you swap to a gunner weapon. So you swap to a ranged weapon. And it dynamically just changes when you swap your weapon. This gives precedence for other skills like this. So when you're building your character and you're putting armor on and you're getting more armor, it's definitely worth it to consider the fact that some of your armor skills might be swapped to different ones if, say, you bring a bowgun as your secondary weapon. So keep that in mind. I really, really hope that they explain this in game somewhere, or it's shown, because it could get confusing for a lot of people. The best rule of thumb is to think like, is it a skill that only works with a melee weapon? More than likely it'll be swapped out for a skill that only works with a gunner weapon. I felt like that'd be kind of worth mentioning. Outside of that, skills in Monster Hunter, you basically get levels of a skill per, little block you have on it. You can max it out when you have multiple copies of the skill. Don't be afraid to experiment with mixed sets. Mixing up different armor sets to come up with, a cool build or whatever. It's a pretty simple system once you understand it, but can get confusing eventually when there's a lot of armor sets to deal with. But that's later. You shouldn't really have to worry too much about it at the start. Skills don't give you too much power in low rank, so should be pretty good. I want to get to probably the most important part of this video, and the most confusing part, I think, for most people. I want to talk about elements and ailments. This is something I almost know for sure is not going to be explained in game properly. Why do I know this? Because it hasn't been, and we had Monster Hunter's been out for a very long time, and this is something that, oh dear, has not been explained well at all. So, we'll start with elements. So I want to explain the differences between the two, and then I kind of want to go through each of them, sort of. So, starting with elements, to basically summarize the difference, elements are damage types, ailments are status effects. Okay? Now, it's important to consider that there are different... These are very different, but a lot of times when they're on your weapon, it's categorized at, like, they're all categorized under elements for some reason. Ignore this. Ignore the game telling you an ailment is an element. If it says it has something like sleep and it's an element on your weapon, ignore it completely. It does not do a damage type. It does not do additional damage. That's not how it works. Anyway, elements. Elements are damage types. These will make you hit harder. Somewhat. Kind of depends. What I mean by this is it basically adds a sort of... it adds basically additional damage per individual hit you do. At different motion values. It's basically functions as kind of like additional... It's like additional added attack onto your weapon with its own set of motion values for each attack that you make. Though typically they're a lot lower than like your regular ones for physical damage, for regular just attack. The point that's important to consider though is most of the time, element, because of the way it's calculated, is a lot more effective on weapons that hit faster. So, weapons with lower motion value, but they hit like super rapidly, you'll see a much bigger performance with element with those types of weapons. Examples being dual blades, elemental bow guns that sort of pierce and whatnot. Bow. Maybe to some extent hunting horn. We'll have to see how that works. I can't say for certain how they're going to handle that, but element is good on weapons that hit faster. On weapons that hit slower, element can work, but physical, just straight raw is typically better. It usually is. But, you know, there are some situations where it could work. Basically, the elements that... the 5 elements in the game is fire, water, thunder, ice, and dragon. These are your 5 elements. Now for the ailments part. Ailments do not do additional damage. What they do is instead they add a status effect to your weapon. And the way it works is there is a kind of an invisible meter that you can't see, but it applies on the monster whenever you hit an enemy with a weapon that has an ailment on it. It deals damage to this invisible meter, and the meter slowly fills up and builds up. Once it reaches its maximum, the effect takes over, and the effect happens to the monster. If you've ever played a Souls-like game, or you've ever played Elden Ring, for instance, it functions very similar to that system, pretty much, where it's like poison and, like sleep and stuff. Now, there's actually quite a few different ailments in the game. Now, some of them are kind of secret. Some of them are like hidden. So there's we'll get into that in a second here, but I'm gonna just go through the ones that are pretty obvious. So you have poison. Poison's pretty basic. It deals what you'd imagine. It deals damage over time, right? It deals dot damage. Now this damage is percentage based. It's based off the monster's max HP. So the bigger the HP bar, the more damage it will do. So it's very good actually. Poison's quite good. Stun, right? Stun is when you KO a monster, you knock out a monster. This isn't inherently obvious. You kind of need to know when a monster gets stunned. Sometimes you won't always know if you're new, typically. But weapons that can stun a monster are weapons that deal like blunt damage. Some weapon attacks do blunt damage, but not every weapon attack does blunt damage. It's important to consider that. Bowguns can do it with sticky ammo. Hammer can do it. Hunting horn can do it because they're blunt weapons. And shield attacks on lance, for instance, and SNS can do blunt damage. Now, these are not limited to these weapons only. I could go through all of the weapons that can do it, but we'd be here for quite a while. What's important is the visual effect, and basically there's a way you can tell when you're doing blunt damage. If the monster has these kind of star-like daze effects over their head when you hit them, and it does a specific sound cue as well, you'll know that you're doing KO damage. You're doing knockout damage, you're doing blunt damage, it's various, it's called that, right? And that means you're building up stun. That means you're building up the monster to a KO. When the monster gets knocked out or they get KO'd, you'll actually see these kind of like dazed sparks go off around their head, pretty much, and they fall to the ground and they're immobilized for a period. Outside of that, you have other status effects like sleep and paralysis. Sleep is cool. When a monster gets put to sleep, they take double damage. They take double damage on the first attack to hit them when they to wake them up, basically. So the attack that wakes them up will deal double damage. This is important for newer players to get to understand, because there is a tactic in Monster Hunter called sleep bombing, where people will basically sleep the monster. Then they will place bombs around the monster, or like different parts, right? And they will charge up a big hitting attack to get the double damage multiplier, and then blow up all of the bombs after the fact to get some additional damage off. It chunks monsters. It does a lot of damage. It's very good. Sleep on weapons is great in multiplayer. It's great in many different hunts. It's great solo. Sleep is a very good status. And this also counts when monsters go to sleep willingly too. So that's also important to keep in mind. Another one is paralysis. It's basically the shock trap effect without the fact that you can capture the monster. There's not much to cover regarding this, aside from just it immobilizes the monster, free damage, cool, right? Last one is blast. Blast is good. It's basically additional damage. Basically, you accumulate when you accumulate the status effect. When the status effect takes or goes active, it ignores things like hit zone values. It ignores like armor or whatever you want to call it, and just deals a large amount of blast damage, pretty much. Just a large amount of damage. Now, I want to get into like a little hidden. There's a little bonus, a hidden bonus ailment in the game that isn't covered usually, called Exhaustion. So Exhaustion is kind of a hidden status that is also applied when you do blunt damage. This is when you do like build up for a stun or you build up for KO, you're doing blunt damage. When you do blunt damage, you can actually deplete the monster's stamina. And this makes them get tired. This makes them get hungry faster. When a monster is out of stamina or they're tired, they get significantly slower. They get slower, they get like, their animation speed goes down. They're just slow, pretty much. It's a cool debuff and underrated because most people don't really know about it and don't know it's something you can really take advantage of. If you're not like a hammer main or you're not like a hunting horn main, you probably don't know too much about it. But hey, if you are trying out those weapons in Monster Hunter Wilds and you plan on getting to use them, boy, are you in for a lot of fun, because those weapons are gold. I can tell you that for sure. Praise Ryozo, right? That pretty much covers most of what I wanted to talk about regarding some of the more like newer, more confusing aspects about the game. I'm sure there will be like a lot more intricate things to come and more, specific mechanics regarding it. Like wounding. Wounding is something that is completely kind of new. At least they took it in a new direction in this game. And I'm very curious to see how wounding works to its fullest extent. I will most likely be doing testing when the game comes out. I am so excited for this game. I am I can't wait. I can't wait. This game, it's coming out very, very soon. I've already pre-ordered it, and I can't wait to sink so much time into this game. So, I'm hoping if you're a new player, you have as much fun as I'm going to have with the game. Or, you just have fun. I hope this game does you well. And, good hunting.